What is art modeling? Hey guys, my name is Katarina Berry. Welcome to my YouTube channel if you're new here. In today's video, I want to talk to you about art modeling and what it is. I'm an art model that has been practicing for about 2 years, and I have done portraits, I have posed for sculpture, and most importantly and most frequently, I have posed as a figure model, which in all the cases of my doing that involved me posing completely nude to a group of artists or to an art class. So as I progressed with this hobby and as I like to consider it a form of self-expression, I've encountered a lot of confusion from people that just don't understand what art modeling is. They have a lot of kind of fear associated with it because they know it involves nudity sometimes, and so some have asked me if it's appropriate, if it is sexual, and what that even means. Some people were interested in trying to become an art model or at least give it a shot. And so I decided that this video was necessary in order to create a better culture of understanding of art modeling. So without further ado, let's jump into number one. Art modeling is historic. You can see many examples of art modeling throughout history, and especially you can do that if you go to a museum. You will be able to see different works by different artists throughout the history of humanity, trying themselves at capturing either a portrait of a person or creating, drawings and paintings of an entire figure of human body. Sometimes you will see pictures that are showing nude figures, male and female, young and old, and historically, art modeling is the closest an artist can get to sketching from the body itself. And before, there was no such method as taking a photograph. So even though in modern world, oftentimes artists will draw from photograph or paint from a photograph, still the vast majority of those who are learning to do figure sketching and learning how to draw a human body, they prefer to learn with a live model. So we're moving on to number two. Art modeling is educational. It allows those who are learning how to draw and how to paint to learn what a human body looks like alive. And what I mean by that is it can be a lot easier to draw from, say, a photograph, but at the same time, you're not going to be able to capture or train yourself to adjust as the human body naturally breathes and moves in these little ways. And of course, art modeling involves a lot of stillness, but still the body is alive. So the body's breathing, the body's moving, and the artist has to learn how to actually capture a human body. So the educational component of it is it introduces the artists to the reality of what an actual body is like and what it's like to draw it while it's continuing to be alive and breathe and move and all these elements. So number three, this is art modeling is a reflection of the human condition. And what I mean by that is that essentially everyone is an art model. Everyone is a model of what a living body looks like. And whereas in traditional, or in the traditional meaning of the word model or modeling in our culture, which kind of implies this, fashion photography perhaps, or advertising or magazines or things like that. And it can be quite selective and exclusive, and there's a certain look that these mediums usually seek out. Art modeling is not exclusive. It is the opposite, because what art modeling is about learning how to draw a human figure, not an ideal human figure, not a critically acclaimed human figure, but a form of human body, the shape and the curves and all the different aspects of the human body. So the human condition of having a body qualifies everyone to be potentially an art model. So art modeling is a reflection of human condition that all humans share, regardless of their shape, size, build, appearance, and other determinations such as physical ability, race, and all sorts of elements that contributes to the individuality of each and every person. So number 4, and I think I kind of covered that in number 3 a little bit, but number 4 is art modeling is non-exclusive. Art modeling, as I mentioned, is not a judgment call on whether you qualify to be considered societally, beautiful or attractive. It's not about whether someone fits a certain mold or a certain standard or a certain size or is able to wear certain things. It is really non-exclusive. In fact, there's a variety of art models that I've encountered on my journey of being an art model. And there are people that are elderly, there are people that are, posed as a couple. I've not seen that in person, but I've seen the results of the art produced from an art model mother posing with her baby. There's a variety of scenarios for art modeling, and none of them are fundamentally exclusive based on one's appearance or one's ability to fit a certain look. So number 5, art modeling is hard work, and yes, it usually involves holding a pose for a prolonged period of time and being as still as you possibly can. In my personal experience of being an art model, I've done several sessions where there would be just one pose for a span of 3 or 4 hours. Now, of course, every 25 minutes or half an hour, I would get a break to be able to get up from the pose and stretch and, walk around, because your body does get numb sometimes depending on the pose. Sometimes you get really uncomfortable, and it's just really necessary to make sure that the blood is flowing and everything's okay. So, the breaks are necessary. However, even holding a pose, even if it's sitting or laying down or half laying down, and especially if it's standing, it is very difficult, even if it's 25 minutes at a time. It requires concentration, but it also requires the model to hold a certain expression, an emotion of a pose, a mood that the pose conveys. So it's not necessarily kind of, being blank and just kind of staring into space relaxed. It's usually tense, and since you have to hold the pose for a long period of time without moving, it can be a lot more difficult to do than it looks maybe at the first glance. So art modeling definitely is hard work. Moving on to number 6, art modeling takes courage. Art modeling takes courage because in its most known form of figure modeling, you are often, as I mentioned, in my case, it always is, like whenever I do figure modeling, I am always nude, because that's the point of figure modeling, is the artists need to learn how to draw a human figure. And it does take courage, because it takes a certain level of selflessness and being comfortable with being imperfect, accepting the fact that you're imperfect, and also having enough courage to not feel judged, because the artists, as they are drawing the live model, they will look very closely at the model, and they will focus on it's not about necessarily making eye contact, but they will focus on different parts of your body in order to paint them. And so it's being still in a pose, not moving, and also having people like stare at you and paint you as you do that. And I think the courageous part is not feeling like you're being judged, and realizing that these people are creating, they're focused on their work. And so it's not about you, it's about how closely they can capture what they see. And being that exposed, being that open with a group of strangers, with a group of art students, and again, not feeling judged, not feeling afraid, accepting the fact that you're imperfect, accepting your body the way that it is in order to really focus on holding the pose. It takes a lot of courage, and I think that's actually one of my favorite parts about art modeling is the courage that it requires, because it challenges me and it makes me love myself more, just because I am courageous in every time I do that, accepting myself the way that I am, because otherwise I won't be able to focus. So it's definitely something that is not for the faint of heart, I would say. So then we're moving on to number 7. And number 7 is art modeling reflects the artist. So when someone paints a figure or a portrait, yes, they are painting from the model. Yes, they're trying to do the best they can to mimic what they are seeing or reflect what they are seeing on paper the best that they can. However, the work will be a reflection of them as well, because the work will reflect what they see, and everyone sees different things. So as much as it's tempting to feel maybe a little insecure or feel like, what you see, the work that you see created from your likeness is about you, it's not just about you, it's actually more about the artist, because it reflects their point of view, it reflects where they are sitting, what materials they're using to create that piece of art, and their level of skill, and just their personal understanding, and just their personal perspective when it comes to expressing what they see in front of them. Everyone has a different style, and so it's just important to remember that the results of art modeling are just as much, if not more, about the artist as they are about the model. So number 8, art modeling reflects not just the artist, but also the observer, because sometimes I've heard that, so I've been painted many times, and I do my best to photograph the works of art that my likeness was used in. And sometimes I'll get a piece of art as a gift from one of the artists in the groups for which I model. And I have built up quite a collection of these at home. And I've also posted them online, because I think that art is beautiful and art should not be censored. So a few times I've heard that some people consider it sexual. And here's where you see how the results of art modeling reflect the observer, because someone may look at a painting of a woman who is naked in the painting, and pay attention to the style of that painting, pay attention to the color, pay attention to the technique, pay attention to maybe the price if they want to buy the painting, or pay attention to just the general composition and just the way that it's put together. And yet some people will look at a painting and see a naked woman, and to them that will be sexual, because to them nudity is sexual. But that would not be the case of another observer necessarily. So as you can see, the results of art modeling not only reflect the artist, they also reflect the person who is viewing that painting or that drawing, and what their perspective is. Number 9, I think that art modeling is asexual. I have never had an art modeling session where there was any sexual context, there was any sexual environment of the artist, or where I felt sexual because I was nude. It would be extremely confusing, unprofessional, and completely inappropriate, because art modeling is a professional endeavor. It is something that is work. and as I mentioned, hard work, but it is also something that it requires a lot of focus, both from the model and from the artist. And there is no room for any kind of inappropriate interaction or any kind of weirdness, because that's just not what it is. And so I think the act of art modeling is asexual. It is purely work, it is purely focused. Yes, it can be expressive, it can be artistic, certainly, it can be creative, but in the nature of art modeling, there is nothing sexual. There is nothing that is connected to any kind of sexual activity, other than possibly being nude. And then again, I do not think that nudity is sexual. Nudity is a natural state of a human body. We're all born nude, essentially. And sexual activity and sexual nature is completely different, and it has nothing to do with nudity as a standalone state of a body, or nudity in art modeling. And another thing to consider is, there's a lot of art classes in universities that involve or invite students to also participate as art models, and also these opportunities are usually paid. So if universities are, if that's something most American universities and universities in the rest of the world, if that's something that they create an environment for in an official institution such as a university, such as a school, then I doubt they would be creating these opportunities or allowing students to practice this if it was indeed sexual. So I do insist that art modeling in itself is not sexual at all. So moving on to number 10, art modeling is widely used in universities, as I just mentioned. And the reason it's used is because that is part of education. The educational component, again, as I mentioned before, the nature of human body, the human condition, is universal. We all have different bodies, and yet we all living human beings have bodies. And so even if a student is not necessarily pursuing being an artist full time when they graduate, they may take an art class to learn how to draw and to learn how to draw human figures. And so, it's something that I've seen in the United States. It's something that I've seen in other countries, such as Russian Federation, where I am originally from. And a lot of universities have art classes and have art majors, and they do also have classes that teach figure drawing based on the person who is posing, based on live modeling. Moving on to number 11, art modeling is organized by groups of artists. It can be taught in universities, but it can also be part of organizations of artists that gather together to draw and paint, and often employ art models to have the privilege and to have the capability of drawing a human from their live presence, which is a lot more realistic and a lot more challenging than drawing from photograph or a dummy or perhaps a statue, and these groups of artists, at least in the community where I live in South Carolina, are pretty regular occurrences. They meet regularly and they hire art models, and usually there's a rotation of art models that they hire and that they draw, just to create the diversity and to have different exposure to different shapes and different figures and different examples of the human condition. Number 12 is art modeling is organized by art museums. I've personally had the pleasure of posing for several groups organized by local museums that employ art models, and I've also been part of a class, kind of like elective class taught by a museum. And it wasn't necessarily part of a university type of education. It was more of a class that anyone can take, like adult audiences can take. So it is also common to see art modeling opportunities organized by local museums. So number 13 is art modeling comes in different forms. And there are two main forms of art modeling. One is portrait, which just involves you being painted, just your face, maybe your shoulders, your bust area, so to speak. The other form of art modeling is figure modeling. So that is usually when you will be nude and painted by artists. Your full figure is painted or drawn in this case. Now, I've also seen different other types of art modeling. And one of the forms that I've recently observed emerge during the global crisis that we are going through in 2020 is art modeling through video. So there will be an art model, and usually she will not be completely nude. She will be wearing underwear that is very tight fitting and yet kind of conservative in the sense that it just makes sure that all the private parts are covered and yet exposed, for the shape of the body itself. So like wearing skin tone underwear, and these models would pose as part of a class, as part of an online class. And there's a video of an art model standing or holding a pose or sitting in the pose. And the video is, goes on for a length of time, so that the experience of seeing that model is similar to observing a live model in the studio. And I think that's very innovative and interesting. And in this case, there's a complete nudity is not required, but it's close to that because just for the appropriateness part of having a video such as this used for education, that there's a little bit more coverage. But I think it's an interesting way that this industry is pivoting. So that's going to be something to consider going forward, art modeling virtually. So there are different types of art modeling, and we're moving on to number 14. Art modeling is always very unique. When I was just starting with art modeling, I was constantly on the lookout for examples and skills and poses and different, tips on how to be the best at art modeling that I could be. But later I discovered that, naturally you kind of develop your own approach as you do more of art modeling, and you progress to understand which poses work better for you and are more interesting for the artists to draw, more complex, that provide enough exposure, because usually you're observed from different vantage points in the room, in the studio. So it's important to allow yourself to kind of develop your own style of art modeling and your own understanding of what works for you and what doesn't. Again, at the very beginning, I would take on poses that were extremely difficult to hold and just kind of really challenge myself. And sometimes I would really regret it, because if the pose was lasted a very long time and I was very uncomfortable, it was obviously excruciating, and it was really hard to focus on stillness without fidgeting. And so I learned to stay away from these, because clearly that's not good for the artist, that's not good for me, and it needs to be something that that you can really kind of submerge into, that you can relax into. Even if it's a difficult pose, you still need to be able to have some kind of level of comfort, so that you can focus on stillness versus focusing on not losing balance, for example. So the more you do art modeling, the more you learn, and the more you develop your own unique style and understanding of how it works and how it works best for you. So moving on to number 15, art modeling is a necessity for art. And even as I mentioned, during this crisis, In 2020, when we're seeing businesses shut down, when we're seeing people, isolated at home, when we're seeing the world kind of change and turn into something we've never experienced before, art modeling remains a necessity for art. And as I mentioned, online art classes have been finding ways to feature a live model to their audience, to their students, by creating videos where the model indeed does pose live for a period of time, holding a pose so that the students can see an actual human being holding a pose versus a photograph of someone in the moment of time. So it is a necessity for art, and it's remaining a necessity even in times when art modeling cannot be done in person live anymore for now. And then final point, number 16, is it's art modeling is a form of expression, like any art. So when someone draws an art model, it's a form of expression of their artistry, of their talent, of their skill. But when an art model poses for artists, it's also an expression, because there's an emotion in the pose, there's a message in the pose, there is that unique individual presence of that model in that pose, and that unique individual likeness of that model that will be captured by the artists. Everyone has a unique shape, everyone has a unique body, and I think we're all worthy of being art models, which is why I'm such a big fan of that type of work and that type of expression. But being vulnerable enough and courageous enough to be an art model and to use your presence and your body as an inspiration and an education to those who will draw you is artistic expression indeed. And it's honestly my favorite form of artistic expression. So I hope this video has been helpful to you. I hope it has clarified the definition of art modeling and what that is, what it means, what it stands for. If any of you are interested in becoming an art model, I have linked several videos that are about the subject that you can find on my channel. If you have any questions, you can let me know in the comments. I respond to all of my comments. I would be happy to talk with you. And then finally, this is part of the series, so I will link the next video as we wrap up, and you will also be able to find that in the description. But the next video is what art modeling isn't, and then I'm also doing another video on the tips for beginner art models. So be sure to check those two out and some other links that I'll be sharing. And then this note, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. And if this has brought value to you, please consider giving it a like. I appreciate you guys very much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, take care.